Hello, and welcome to today's panel discussion where we will be covering how to prepare and manage audits and inspections across global markets. Thank you for joining us. My name is John Spear, and I'm the founder at Greenlight Guru, and I will be the moderator for today's event. We've got a really special presentation scheduled for you today. I know our panelists are really looking forward to sharing their experiences and expertise on regulatory audits and inspections. Before we dive too deep into today's discussion and introduce our panelists, I'm going to touch on a few items real quick. First, today's panel discussion is going to run for about an hour to 75 minutes in total, and we'll include some time at the end for audience Q&A. So throughout the session today, if you have a question about audits and inspections, feel free to add those into the questions in the GoToWebinar panel. And like I said, we'll get to as many of those as time permits on the tail end. We will be recording this, and we will be sharing the full recording and the slides with all registered participants after the webinar. So keep an eye on that and look for an email in your inbox here, probably sometime later today, maybe sometime early next week. But yes, we are recording. Yes, you will have an opportunity to review this at a later date. I'd also like to share a few words about Greenlight Guru and why we put on these free training sessions. If you've been on one of our training sessions before, then you know that we put these on because improving the quality of life is our mission here at Greenlight Guru, and it's likely a similar mission to many of you in the audience today. Anything that we can do as an organization that helps device makers bring safer, life-changing devices to market quicker and with less risk aligns with that mission. We're constantly looking for ways to fulfill that mission, whether that's through hosting these free training sessions and webinars and panel discussions, or creating an entirely reimagined training experience all together with the brand new Greenlight Guru Academy. What is this? Well, the Greenlight Guru Academy is a medical device specific educational platform built from our library of content resources and taught by subject matter experts. Gurus like myself and others on the Greenlight Guru team will be frequently adding new courses and learning paths on topics like design controls, risk management, regulatory submissions, and much more. In fact, we have recently added courses on audits and inspections as well. After today's presentation, visit academy.greenlight.guru to enjoy free access to the courses. All you need to do is have an access code, and I'll put that in the chat window, but the access code is explore underscore engage underscore educate. And if you didn't jot that down, send me a note and we'll get that to you for sure. We hope you enjoy it. And you can also contact us regarding the Greenlight Guru Academy via email. It's very easy, academy@greenlight.guru. In addition to our growing training programs, we fulfill our mission by partnering with world-class medical device professionals like today's panelists, as well as through our award-winning medical device quality management system software. If you'd like to learn about why medical device companies from across the globe are moving away from paper-based general purpose quality management systems and adopting the Greenlight Guru purpose-built medical device success platform, I encourage you to head over to the website www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation as well to schedule your free personalized one-on-one demonstration. In doing so, how the very best medical device companies are leveraging our purpose-built quality management software to gain ISO 13485 certification, market clearances and approvals, breeze through audits and inspections, and push beyond just compliance to produce true quality medical devices. So again, if you're interested in learning how we can help you and your medical device company, make sure you visit that website, www.greenlight.guru after today's webinar and schedule your free personalized demo. So let's move ahead. Let me briefly cover today's agenda. It's pretty simple today. I'm going to take a moment here and introduce each of our panelists, share with you some of their a brief bio and some of their expertise, and then we're going to get into a panel discussion. We've got a great panel today, folks with a lot of experiences from a lot of different perspectives on audits and inspections, and then, as I mentioned, audience Q&A. So if you have questions, be sure to type those in, and we'll get to as many of those as time permits. So let me take a moment and introduce our panelists. And I'm not going to read these, folks. You can read these, and of course, you'll have the slides after today. I'll just give you a little bit of perspective that I know about each of our panelists. So first up is Steve Needleman. Steve is with King and Spalding. Steve has a ton of experience with FDA and audits and inspections and management systems. I know he does a lot of work through their law firm King and Spalding, helping companies with post-inspection activities. So really a great resource and a ton of knowledge and expertise, and he's been doing this for a long time. So he's seen a lot of good things and a lot of things that need to be improved. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
Next up is Colleen Hiddle. You're welcome, Steve. Next up is Colleen Hiddle. Colleen was with Pro Veritas Partners. My short story with Colleen is she saw something in me, gosh, many years ago, way before Greenlight, and I guess gave me a chance to enter into the world of consulting. I know Colleen does a lot of work helping companies with mock inspections and audits, both for ISO as well as for FDA, and does a ton of work in this space and has a ton of expertise on pretty much all things regulatory. So welcome, Colleen, to the panel. I know the picture that you see on screen and the video that you see, you may not think that these are the same people, but they are. So George Zach with Two Harbors. I've known George for a few years now. George, he and I connected through the Case for Quality Initiative. George is one of the lead appraisers for the Case for Quality Initiative, and we'll talk a little bit about that and how that might relate to inspections as well. So welcome, George. Sarah Adams is one of Greenlight Guru's own. She's a medical device guru at Greenlight Guru and has a ton of experience with establishing quality systems and navigating and managing audits and inspections. And then finally, joining or rounding out our panel is Norbert Struyver with TÜV SÜD. TÜV SÜD is probably one of those household names, especially with respect to auditing organizations and notified bodies. And I'm sure he's got a lot to share with us today on EU MDR and ISO audits and things of that nature. So welcome, Norbert, as well. So again, folks, here's our topic. We're going to get into preparing and managing audits and inspections. And I guess without further ado, let me stop sharing my screen and let's dive right in. So, all right, folks, everybody's video's good. Sound check for everybody. Everybody good?
Yep.
All right.
Hi, John.
All right.
Works.
Dive right. All right. So, and I'm going to call on each of you as appropriate. I know, all of us have a lot of opinions and expertise and experiences on all these topics. My request from the panel is, keep it fairly concise. I mean, I don't want you to shortchange the audience by any stretch of the imagination, but we've got a lot of information we can dive into, and certainly after you've had a chance to answer, if others have some follow-up, just raise your hand, let me know, and we'll dive right in. So I think a good place to start first might be to remind folks of what audits and inspections were like prior to COVID-19. So Colleen, would you mind maybe taking a couple of moments and just sort of giving us or reminding us what the landscape was like with respect to audits and inspections prior to COVID?
Sure. So, hi everyone. I would say the key differentiator pre and post COVID has to do with the luxury of physical inspection of a facility, the tour, the ability to feel kind of just the essence of a building, including the environmental controls and the way that business is conducted. I think further, pre-COVID, just the exchange of information face-to-face with people kind of just gave you nuance in addition to, the words on a page, which obviously in a remote setting is what we've relied on, during this pandemic.
All right. Any other tidbits or thoughts or things that anyone else wants to offer with respect to the world pre-COVID? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to Colleen's point, I think you get a different culture of quality when you just do it remotely. You just don't get the sense of what's going on at a firm. You just don't get that feel that, yep, they're in sync or there's something awry here. And is it a personnel issue? Is it a paperwork issue? Is it just an execution issue? Which is it? And I think you just can't pull that out of reviewing paperwork.
Absolutely. I actually heard, I was on a call earlier this week, and someone was sharing that that the audit, I think it was actually from an FDA perspective, that it was quite a bit different. Like, how do you inspect or even audit a manufacturing facility when it's all remote? And they were talking about, the quality manager would walk around, FaceTime on phone and walk around like showing things. And I know, George, you and I have talked a little bit about this in your work with Case for Quality. You shared that really, post-COVID, that really hampered the ability to do manufacturing. What were some of the things that you guys did from a Case for Quality initiative to assess and evaluate manufacturing operations?
Sure. So certainly sites have been trying to provide a video of the tour, and really that occurs two ways, right? It's a live tour where they're walking around maybe with their laptop or an iPad or a phone, and they're trying to do that video, or they're pre-recording it. And in some cases, they've even actually done some post-production on it to put some words at the bottom to say, this is what the workstation is that you're looking at. Both have their advantages. The live one, you could certainly say, can you please turn the camera there? I'd like to look at that. Can you zoom me in a little bit more closely on that piece? But there's challenges with that. I've been with folks that have actually gotten motion sick by the cameras moving around so much. They're like, I don't feel so good. The recorded ones can be really good because they end up being an educational tool often to the folks back at the plant, right? And including management, right? They're like, oh wow, I didn't know that we did that in our production piece. So it's actually something that can end up becoming very reusable. So there's just a variety of approaches and technology to record it. It certainly is not as good as walking around and seeing and feeling and smelling and touching the things at a manufacturing facility. But throughout this, everybody's capabilities have gotten a lot better as they've become more comfortable with those sorts of technologies and things to use to make those available to us.
All right, absolutely. So, Norbert, I'm curious from the TÜV-SÜD's perspective, how has COVID impacted TÜV-SÜD's ability to do audit of companies, and what are maybe some of the bigger challenges that you and your team has faced doing so?
Yeah, good question. It's certainly being a notified body. Our role is somewhere between the regulators and the manufacturers, and to what extent we can apply remote audits is quite limited on accreditors and competent authorities. And yeah, if you follow these discussions right at a time where we are in the transition to the MDR, and by the concept, every MDR audit is categorized as being an initial audit. So we are not doing surveillance, and it was quite a challenge as initial audits on the MDR. There was no green light. There was no go for having these initial MDR audits, even for manufacturers who have been certified under the previous legislation under the MDD. We could not go through fully remote audits for a very long time, and still there are some limitations. So as an organization, even TÜV-SÜD is ready, and we adapted with our processes to allow remote auditing. There is a limitation on getting initial MDR audits. So that's was a challenge on the whole scheduling, ramping up for the first year MDR audits after we got our designation here. That's the most severe impact, and we are still catching up now when we can go out and we have some limited options for initial MDR audit. to get these MDR certification rolled out. Yeah, another
So,
important.
sure, go ahead.
Yeah, another aspect I want to bring in is you might know the requirement of having unannounced audits. So in a certification cycle, we are supposed, depending on the risk class, we are supposed to go on an unannounced audit, and that's kind of impossible to have unannounced remote audits scheduled. So that's something we have to deal with and catch up now when we go back to traveling and restart unannounced auditing.
Mm-hmm. So, Steve, I'm curious. I know, like in the outside U.S. world, it seems like the auditing organizations have adapted a little bit to provide or allow for some of these remote activities. Norbert does bring up a really good point about unannounced audits, but I mean, did FDA's inspection activity, did it come to a screeching halt during COVID with respect to inspections?
Yeah, actually, for medical devices, it pretty much did. I have the numbers actually, and I think they did a total of 8 mission critical inspections and 12 for cause inspections for medical devices. You know, in other areas of FDA's authority, especially for pharmaceuticals and biologics, they have the 70484 authority, where they can request records in lieu of an inspection or as part of an inspection. It's not an official inspection, but quite frankly, if they don't like it, they have issued warning letters as a result of their review. They don't have that authority for medical devices. So they have rolled out a remote regulatory assessment recently, which is not an inspection. It's a very voluntary program. In my conversations with FDA, it's not punitive at all if you do not wish to participate. Many small firms don't have the capacity or the IT to be able to participate in these programs. There would be certainly no effort by the agency to say that's a refusal inspection, nor would it necessarily prioritize them for a more immediate inspection once FDA resumes, which they have begun to do so. These remote regulatory assessments, as I mentioned, are very voluntary. There's no authority for FDA to request these. It's strictly a matter of a cooperative program with industry. And if it goes well, it can help you, though, perhaps placing you further back in the queue for an on-site inspection as life comes back to normal.
So, Colleen, I know you do work not just with med device companies, but also some other areas of life science. Are you seeing a difference in how FDA is interacting with companies depending on which sector of life science they're in when it comes to inspections?
Yeah, I agree with the point that Steve made, is that I think the medical device industry has been probably affected disproportionately, and almost, you know, when you think about technology and software and some of those ancillary kind of support services, those are also, you know, came to a screeching halt. I've seen more activity in pharma, API, you know, some contamination issues. So it's almost, when you think about risk to health or risk to patient, I think it kind of almost follows that same hierarchy, if you will. So I would put med device kind of just squarely in the middle, pharma biologics more to the top, and the software as a service or other kinds of support services kind of almost at the bottom.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, you know, there's been 2 GAO, well, there was a GAO report, and just recently there was a letter on May 18th to the secretary from GAO, and it was focusing on how FDA is going to catch up on their inspections and concerns about inspections, et cetera. And it always focuses on drug safety, drug security, and is silent about medical devices. So just keep that as, you know, just putting it in the hierarchy. It is definitely pharma and biologics focused, not device.
Sarah, I haven't forgotten about you. So I know that you're newer to the Greenlight Guru team, and you shared a story that before you joined Greenlight that you got a double whammy.
I got a double whammy.
So I think that part of that double whammy was there was this feeling that we were going to be shut down and everything was remote, and that was probably what triggered that. So I guess if you can kind of compare and contrast that experience that you had going through an ISO audit and an FDA inspection in the same week, and what you're hearing from some of our customers. I mean, all of Greenlight's customers are medical device companies, and they're trying to bring products to market, get certification, and things of that nature. How would you compare and contrast those two sets of experiences?
Yeah, so well, the first experience for me hosting both at the same time was a little intimidating, a lot intimidating. Being pulled out of a room that you're with a notified body and being pulled into FDA, to be able to manage that. I think what I'm hearing from my customers is just a lot of unknowns, a lot of, we don't know when they're going to resume. We don't know what that's going to look like. And trying to figure out the best way to handle both scenarios, both in, them auditors coming in or, like back to are they going to surprise us? Or are they going to come, let us know that they're resuming? Not just the fear of the unknown, John, just the not knowing how to best proceed.
But arguably speaking, I mean, even prior to COVID, FDA and auditing or ISO auditing organizations, in fact, it's part of the provision that they could be unannounced. So, I mean, arguably speaking, they could have always been in the same state, right? But what do you think
Yeah.
is different now?
I think it's the fear of not knowing if they're coming in person or if they are going to handle that remotely. I arguably was a person in audits who always printed everything and brought it in the room. I didn't want to pull in an EQMS. I didn't want to expose myself that way. COVID made me expose myself that way because after we switched to completely virtual customer audits, I didn't have a choice. I couldn't pull and print. I think it's just the not knowing how best to prepare. There's so much that you cannot control with an FDA or notified inspection. Like I'm at your mercy. So the parts that I can control, I want to be able to control. And there's just this unknown of what that's going to look like. I think people are trying to figure out, how do I best prepare? And there's just a whole set of unknowns that comes with that.
All right, I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but Steve, go ahead and chime
Yeah,
in.
I just want to, to that point, the agency has come out very clearly in their guidance as of last July 20th, and they continue to perpetuate. They will pre-announce all inspections. We've done it for devices forever with the medical device grassroots initiative, but they're doing it for pharma, they're doing it for biologics, food, et cetera. And our experience so far has been they've been very descriptive in when they're planning an inspection, what they're going to ask for, what to have prepared. In fact, if it's going to be on site, whether it's going to be virtual. If it's on site, can we do it outdoors? Can we do it where there's the least risk to people? They've been pretty explicit, but that's very recent that they've started doing that. So I think some of that fear may go away over time. But yeah, they're going to pre-announce everything. It'll be almost, unless perhaps an OCI inspection, which you might not want to be involved with. They probably, everything will be pre-announced. So that's a good thing.
Sarah, you said something a moment ago, and I'm going to open this up. I'm not going to call in any. Curious to hear different perspectives. Is my preparation for a virtual audit or inspection, is it really that much different than a live one?
Yes.
Who has a thought on that? Yes, who said yes?
Colleen. Yeah,
Go ahead.
It's very different.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a whole technology component that if it's, it's not working well, you need to preload as much documentation as possible because you're literally, a person is literally checking into an electronic library or documents. It's not, it's not the same as having a ready room. So there's just a big technology solution piece that needs to be front loaded to make a virtual audit, give it even any chance of being productive.
George.
Yeah, I agree with Colleen, but I would say that being inspection ready. I mean that's something that all the panelists and you've touted with several folks on your podcast. Being inspection or audit ready all the time is really a mindset that you should have. But absolutely, you have to think about, all right, if I'm going to be inspected or audited, what's the location in which I'm going to put these documents, right? Am I just going to present that as a screen share? Am I going to use one of the many technologies that allow for file sharing between myself and this inspecting group? Are the people that are now maybe no longer at the plant, but they're all working from home, do they have reliable internet connections and backup, right? It's so not just their laptop with their Wi-Fi, but a cell phone backup. It's all that sort of technology consideration that is a whole layer on top of it. But I think underneath it, the base of being inspection ready with your QMS and your processes and procedures is still foundational, that you have to be ready at that level.
I'll just add, George,
Norbert,
I
I'm
think you hit on it.
curious.
Oops,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, John. I think you hit on it well at the beginning, but so much of me hosting an audit was communicated in the first 5 to 10 minutes of them coming on site. The first time I did a virtual audit, I was asked for a facility tour and I wasn't prepared for that. I mean, just thinking through the document piece that you guys have hit on, how am I going to establish my credibility virtually? Like, how am I going to, you can't walk around, see, smell, touch my facility. How am I going to establish that rapport with an auditor when I'm looking at you on Zoom or talking to you on the phone?
Those are great points.
Yeah,
Norbert,
there's a lot of folks still, they don't want to be on Zoom, right? And you have to
Yeah.
establish, like, no, you have to turn the camera on. Yes, we all know that you have a pile of laundry over there. We know there's dogs running around in the background. It's okay. That's part of the activity now. But there's still, that's part of some of the, in addition to the tech challenges, there's the interaction challenges that you also have to work through to make sure that you're having an effective activity through these little squares that we all talk in now. I'm sorry, John, you were going to ask Norbert something.
No, it's okay. It's a great point too, because now we're suddenly all way more vulnerable, and we may not be comfortable in doing so, because I might be in my home and my kids might be screaming and throwing fits in the background, or asking me what I'm fixing them for dinner, or whatever the case may be. So I'm suddenly now more vulnerable, and some of that's good because I'm now more human, but some of that's bad because and in the office I can have my guard up, and I have a little bit of polish and things of that nature. So it is a little bit different. Norbert, I'm curious from Tov Sud's perspective. I mean, so far a lot of the comments have been from the auditee perspective, how this has changed. What have you and your team, what have you had to do to train auditors to be just as effective, even though they're going to be remote?
Yeah, that's the question or the term you said, is it effective or not? And there was actually a survey from Team NB, so this is a group of notified bodies, where they asked their members of notified bodies on the experience with remote audits in terms of time. So is it, do we need more or less time? And the majority, they came up that remote audits overall need more time to conduct the audit. And the average was about 10 to 20% more time just for the audit itself. Yeah, so it looks like it's less effective, and we talked through the challenges. Yeah, talking through this square box, having not the full person. You don't understand if someone is browsing through a document. You might step in, he needs to get back, stop that for a moment while the auditor is reading a document. So you don't have the connection, like being in a room, being with other persons, and you know exactly where the auditor currently is working on. So that takes some additional time, and also the preparation. So we internally have, of course, checklists in order to prepare to facilitate remote audits, what can be done up front. But even discussions about what tool we are going to use, what works, then you might see some limitations on on the IT infrastructure, that some tools are not accepted with some manufacturers, vice versa. Not every tool is working within a suit IT infrastructure. So this is the experience from the auditors we have gathered. So it's lacking in the interaction, being just these two dimensions, having a square picture and the sound. And in addition, we typically go out with audit teams. So you have a group of auditors. You have joint activities, but then they spread out, they separate. With a good tool, you might have separate rooms. You have to organize that. You break up the session. You join back later to exchange on the results of the individual parts, and very much related to what tasks you are actually auditing, how well that works, how efficient a remote audit compared to walking through the facilities or a manufacturing site is.
I mean, a few of you have mentioned IT. I think, well, depending on your company, of course, and your product services, but generally speaking, IT is not a huge player during audits and inspections in a normal life, but they're a huge player in this world that we're in today. Anybody have any stories, good or bad, about how that's worked or not worked very well? Any tidbits? All right, no one's chiming in. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things. You know, in the area of pharmaceuticals, they came out with a remote inspection guidance basically about a month or so ago. And FDA, if you're going to communicate information to them, they have 3 avenues of doing that. WebEx is no longer one of them. Government Zoom is, and I forgot the other 2. So that's one limitation that firms will now have. They have to be able to have that capacity and capability to transmit information. IT does play a role, though, in on-site inspections, especially for those for where there is scribing and where there is sharing of information throughout the inspection and during the inspection, and doing various downloads. Some firms project their documents, etc. And, invariably something will go wrong whenever you need it. You can practice, and the day that they show up. I've been at firms where, that's all of a sudden their internet goes down. All of a sudden their computer system goes down. And you need to be prepared either which way. You need to be prepared with the paper copies that Sarah's talking about, where I agree with you. You walk in with those paper copies until you get enough pushback to make it obnoxiously uncomfortable, or you have to be prepared. You have to be able to shuck and jive and be able to handle the situation. But I've seen situations where IT has played a role in live inspections.
I'm just going to say that
That's a
I
good point.
totally changed and went back to my paper-based. I lost that, and it was I feel like for me, it was so much easier to just give access, protected access, gated access, if you will, but to where I was not having to print out paper copies anymore.
I think one particularly innovative, it was a huge capital investment, and a few of you have heard me mention it, but organizations that are investing in IT, not just for the purposes of being prepared to handle an inspection or an audit, but they're also saying, hey, by doing this, we can also do these other things. So earlier I mentioned, let's do the video of the manufacturing plant, the tour. Now we can use that as a training tool or an orientation tool. One site that I was talking about was actually using, they call them bots, but it's essentially, if you think of a Segway with the equivalent of an iPad on the top, that then their engineers in the US could move around through the facility, and their investment there was not just doing that for inspection, but as they were transferring materials to their manufacturing plant in the Pacific Rim, this engineer now can interact with people on the line in that setting. That's a huge capital investment. That's a huge IT investment. But they were looking at that of, we're not just doing this for inspection, but we're doing this for training purposes, and we're doing this for interaction purposes to make for a more effective set of processes as we transfer our product. So yeah, that's just great from an IT perspective. I think if you can look at it and just, what do we do when we do this? Are we doing something here that we can also leverage in other areas that will allow us to make better quality products? Both Sarah and Steve have also said it, though. I think you should drill. So you don't have, I'm curious what Steve's shuck and jive procedure, but so you don't have to shuck and jive, right? Because like, hey, like we've all been in that scenario. You're sharing your screen, right? When you're on site, everybody's got the, they got their laptop there, and you know the conversation's occurring with the back room, right? You don't want to be, when you're sharing your screen, all of a sudden the little toaster IM to pop up to say, what the heck did George just ask? What's going on, right? Like, you have to drill so that you're accustomed to deal with those particular scenarios as well.
Colleen, you've been working with quite a few companies through these sorts of activities in the past year or so. What are some things that you've seen that are like, you might put in the bucket of really good practices, maybe even best practices on handling these types of scenarios?
Well, I think Norbert alluded to this a minute ago. You have to make adequate time to prep. You have to make adequate time. You can't do this in a rush. So I think the companies that have been the most successful in driving, outcomes, good outcomes from the experiences, understand that it's not going to be faster. And I still am a firm believer in multi-person audit teams. I think there are clear roles and responsibilities, use of SMEs, use of subject matter experts for key topics. I think those are still really critical disciplines, and the standards for auditing 19001 talks about that as well. So again, time, experts, native language. I've had 2 projects recently where bringing a native speaker was even more helpful. Again, given the remote nature of the audit, it just helped us drive to, a more productive outcome, even in a virtual setting. So those are some examples.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the preparation and kind of going through, an audit and inspection. What about after the audit and inspection's done? Norbert, are you seeing challenges on the communication post-audit, the follow-up and things of that nature? Anything that sticks out as something that, is working well or maybe not so well from that perspective?
Well, the activity post the audit that hasn't changed compared to pre-COVID-19. Yeah, so follow-ups on findings, unless we have to do another audit, that's not a change here. One impact is if we talk about a recertification of one of ISO or MDD, MDR activities. The certificate we can issue due to the regulations is limited to only 1 year. So you have to add another audit, expecting that we can go out for on-site audits again, as a backup, as an extension to what has been done the year before. So you have a higher scrutiny on a remote audit. So the value of a remote audit is still seen by authorities and regulators as less effective than being on-site. So it's still a bridging the time we have now, but it's not a fully substitute for a regular audit. That's how the rules are set for now. So that's a change that, after the audit, you're already preparing for next recertification audit a year later.
All right, so this could be, and of course you don't have to answer this, but do any of you feel that the quality of audits post-COVID is less than the quality of audits and inspections pre-COVID? Any concerns with the quality?
I wouldn't say.
But
I wouldn't say post-COVID, but during COVID. So from notified body perspective, it's still still only applicable for the time we are in now. Yeah, so we call it, these are auditing during extraordinary events and circumstances. So once COVID is done, we are going most likely back to what it has been. So we are keen to continue, at least for specific tasks. So not every task like manufacturing is perfect, ideal for having that in a remote setting, but a lot of other tasks can be done remotely. So we are thinking about a more hybrid model looking forward in the audit activities. And yeah, there are different initiatives. Yeah, my perspective is, of course, coming from Europe. So MedTech Europe, the industry association, has put out a white paper on that. The notified bodies have given their opinion as a team NB, but it's still due to decisions made by regulators, competent authorities.
Putting George and Colleen on the spot. I mean, you're both very skilled at auditing. What are some of the things that you've had to change about your practices as an auditor in a COVID world? I mean, have you had to do some different things? I mean, you're both very sharp people, and I know you're very thorough. But what are some things that you've had to adjust in order to be just as effective as an auditor in the current world that we're in?
I'm happy to go first. I think the way I have adjusted is I have discovered that I am a instinctive auditor. I use a lot of kind of instinct and subtleties to drive my questions, and I've had to be far more intentional in a remote setting because you don't have the opportunity to have a conversation in the way that you would if you were all in the same room. So in being intentional about my questions and thinking about, okay, if I can get 4 things out of this interaction, what are my key 4 things, rather than going down little rabbit holes based on instincts. And sometimes those rabbit holes are important and sometimes they aren't. So just again, being risk-based, being very clear in my communication, and really focusing on the things that are the most important upfront in asking questions. I think that's the single biggest difference for me. I also am an extrovert, shamelessly love people and being around people. And so part of it for me is also learning to get and how to get energy from the experience, virtually, which is difficult. I don't have the same enthusiasm or passion for it in a remote setting. And so that's just, for me, having to pivot a little bit the way I approach a task. I used to get a lot of energy from just the experience of it. And I've had to modify that personally. And I'm sure that's affected, my style and my discipline during the conduct of an audit.
That's great. I would add, for one, the way I and a lot of my peers approach audits or inspections or appraisals, it's not to check the box simply to say that we did it, but instead we're really trying to find a way to provide a value back to the business as to how they can improve. So getting that tonality across is more difficult in a remote setting. And so we end up doing, and not everybody has this luxury, right? We end up investing some significant periods of time, typically ahead of the appraisal, audit, inspection, we've even called them getting to know you sessions, right? And doing icebreaker. I know it sounds almost like elementary school type stuff, but doing icebreaker type stuff to get to know the people better. Because I think what Colleen's talking about is you often pick up in an audit some of the best stuff, if you will, or the greatest value stuff is in the in-between sessions, right? Not just when you're looking at that document or when you're interviewing somebody, but it's in the in-between sessions, the conversation after the conversation, so to speak. And so that's where you're really building trust, I think, with the site. And maybe that's, for some folks in a true inspection world, maybe from the FDA's perspective, that's a little harder. But if you can build that trust and you can really start to work with those folks to identify areas in which they can improve their quality system, that's really the biggest shift I have to be considerate of in this virtual setting. So to your earlier question is like, has the quality gone down? I know it's the classic answer. It depends. I think certainly if we're talking about, a manufacturing site, that's challenged. But, I've actually scratched my head and wondered, like, if it's just a SAMD in the future, software as a medical device, the tour was just walking around a cube farm anyway, right? So is it really always necessary to be on site as much as we have been in the past? So there are some cases where I think you can still achieve that same level of quality, but there's a lot of risk mitigation that you have to take into account as a part of your inspection planning.
I agree with what he said almost to a word. I've certainly seen examples of where you think to yourself, you know what? We've just re-engineered how we're going to monitor this supplier going forward, and it'll work this way. So certainly there's been some upside examples and some efficiencies that will glean and hopefully roll into kind of this post-COVID world. The quality, I wouldn't say it's down, it's different. It's just a different, it's almost an outlier. Like, I almost hate to think about pooling all of these audit reports together and saying this many majors and this many minors, because it's almost like a data set that doesn't fit. But I think we'll always have an asterisk by those, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously none of us has a crystal ball, and we don't know when we're going to get back to normal, although I'm pretty confident that the new normal will be different than the current and different than what it was even before that. I think there's probably some things that have emerged. I mean, we've all been kind of forced to change pretty much everything about our lives in some way, shape, or another as a result of the pandemic. As a medical device company, I'm pretty sure there are some things that will forever change. Some might be better, some might not be quite as good. With respect to audits and inspections, Sarah, you talked a little bit about paper and digital. And yes, this is a loaded question, of course, but what do you see changing forever or being emerging as a best practice that a lot of companies were forced to go into that maybe they weren't prepared to do when it comes to audits and inspections when we get back to this new normal at some point in time in the future, whatever it might be?
Yeah, I have already alluded to this, but I was a creature of habit and I didn't want to change that. George, you brought up the sharing on the screen and like not wanting that bubble to pop up. That was me. And so I am probably a strange one who loves the virtual audit. I love that we have the option to do that. So best practices I learned in my time during virtual audits of COVID, and obviously I'm not doing that anymore, but I learned how to manage that way. And for me, best practice was sharing electronically. And so I think, as we move into this new normal, I personally think that there will always be the ability to virtually audit. I think that, everybody wants to get back on site. They want that to happen, but we have proved that we can make that work too. And so looking at the risk and having virtual as an option, I think will always be something that's there. But if you stepping into this new normal, if you're still trying to do that on paper, I think you're really going to struggle. And so taking the best practices that we've learned from being virtual and utilizing some form of electronic management system to be able to get auditors what they need quickly. And really, for me, the biggest thing that I learned in virtual audits was that it was so nice to not have to be there all the time handing things across the screen. I could put those guardrails up in my EQMS and let the auditor get what they needed. And of course, some of that, I'm not sure that I would have done that with the FDA. I can't honestly say that I would have just said, have fun. But at the same time, having the ability to get information quickly and not. I frankly don't know what we would have done if we had been a paper system prior to COVID.
Steve, I know in my, since we started Greenlight, obviously Greenlight is a medical device quality management system, and it is a SaaS platform, and it actually theoretically can enable the scenario that Sarah just described, where all of the documents and records that comprise my quality system and how I do my business are in a controlled, validated environment. I know of many stories where in ISO type audits, you can just pull that information on a screen, even when we were in the same conference room at the same time, and never have to print out a record. My experience has been FDA almost always seems to want a hard copy. It seems to me that FDA might have the hardest time adjusting to a non-paper based inspection. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think they're going to get there. I think they're working towards this. I think they realize they got caught flat-footed with this pandemic. I really do. I think they realize they really need to change their entire electronic outlook, their entire interoperability, and their capacity and capabilities going forward. I think that they realize that they lost out on opportunities because they weren't flexible enough to be able to accommodate remote audits quickly. EU, to their credit, they were continuing all along, as well as the MSAT, medical device single audit program, was continuing as well. I think, John, that going forward, that and it'll take time. It's not going to be overnight. Nothing we know is overnight at FDA, but I think they are clearly working towards that, and I think they realize they need to be more reactive and need to be able to have that capacity and capability going forward. I also would say, you don't know what legislative changes they may be looking forward toward as a result of this pandemic to accommodate inspectional capabilities going forward as well. And are they going to consider an equivalent 704A4 for devices and other products? Are they going to require firms to be able to submit information electronically that in the past they haven't? Are they going to take steps? We don't know. We don't know about that at all. We do know that there was some language in an earlier document that was signed by then Commissioner Hahn, that they would look at legislative changes to see if that would help them. But I agree with you. I think that they're going to have to be more adaptive. They know that, and it's just going to take time.
All right, so I'm gonna wrap up the panel portion of our discussion with one or two final questions that I'm going to ask each of you this. So and then we'll get into the audience Q&A. The first, it's the same question, one the positive and the other the negative, but what is your personal favorite change that has happened with audits and inspections since the pandemic? That's your favorite. And then what is your least favorite? And maybe you've already hinted at some of this today, but I'm going to ask each of you your favorite and your least favorite practice, experience, whatever the case may be, with respect to audits and inspections since the pandemic. So I'll give you all a moment to think, unless somebody's ready to answer.
I'm ready.
Right away. All right, Colleen, go.
I forgot to mention that one aspect of a virtual audit that I do love, and so this would be my favorite, is the ability to take the data and electronically and manipulate it, look at it, pivot it, search it. And if somebody hands you an Excel spreadsheet during an audit, that's harder to work with. And so that's for a data junkie, that's great. I love that. Look at trends in post-market, just you have access that you wouldn't have if someone handed you a paper copy, to Sarah's excellent point. And then the least favorite is obvious, the thing I said before, I just miss people.
All right, thank you. Anybody else ready, or someone brave enough to go? Or all right, Norbert, go for it.
Yeah, I can go for it. Yeah. So under MDD and even more on MDR, there are very strict requirements in terms of the authorization of the audit team. So for each specific product, they have to have that specific code. They have to be experienced for that. They need to be trained. They need to be authorized. So in some cases, it's kind of a challenge to have a setup of all the authorized people in a group. And of course, that's easier to get this team together in a virtual setup. Yeah, so you don't have this traveling effort on very specific. Yeah, you might have some sterilization process. Only a few have that code for liquid sterilization, so that can be a challenge to conduct an audit with a fully authorized team. So that helps in a virtual setup. And yeah, the downside is that some tasks really you get much more information if you audit them on site. So that's a challenge. And having a full day or a couple of days in an audit sequence, 8 hours in a row sitting in front of the computer and the camera and trying to conduct an audit, that's perceived as quite stressful for the auditors, yeah, to having that full time being on the spot.
Absolutely. All right, who wants to go next?
I'll go. Mine is similar to
All right.
Colleen's, except from an auditee perspective. What I like about virtual audits is that there's this sense of control that I now have. Yes, I'm a control freak, but like before, an auditor could go any which way they wanted to in my facility, and all of a sudden I control what you see. You still can ask me for something, but I still control it. Also, Colleen, when you said that, I was like, note to self, every person who gives you an Excel file is now going to give you a PDF file of that same data. But yeah, the control as the auditee, I like that about virtual audits. And I also miss the people, just even connecting with different people all across different walks of life. That was a high for me. Colleen, listen to you talk about that. That was fun. I was well known as the auditor who loved, or the auditee that loved to talk to the auditor about football. Anybody from all walks of life could talk football. But say that to say, I just miss connecting with people.
All right, George, Steve, who wants to go next?
I'll be glad to. I agree
All
with
right.
Colleen and Sarah as well. Not having that personal interaction and being more intuitive in your questioning, the inability to all of a sudden find that avenue that you wouldn't find if you do a virtual audit, that all of a sudden that, reacting to a response to a question that you may have had based upon personal interaction, that could open up a whole new Pandora's box of issues or information. You're not getting that in the virtual audit. You're sort of more confined and restricted. So that's definitely, one of the downsides. One of the upsides, though, is, as Sarah and Colleen has said, you're able to manipulate data. Although you should be getting data only of what you asked for, but you are probably able to manipulate data and pull stories and develop issues that you might not have otherwise had available to you.
All right, George.
I'll try to come up with I agree with everything everybody's saying. I'll try to come up with a slightly different take. I certainly don't miss the 150 nights of travel a year. So, but that almost contradictory to that is that I think in this virtual world, we've all ended up mixing our work in other life environments more, right? We're back to back to back to back to back. And the distance from your office to your fridge is way too close. At least for me it is. And I think that's a challenge. So maybe I'd be better off if I was in a plane where I didn't have network access and I could kind of check out and think about things. I think what I'm trying to do with that, though, is turn that so that I have more soak time with the site pre, during, and post to consume this data, as opposed to like, hey, I'm just showing up for your inspection on a Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and now I'm just on. If I can spread that out a little bit, that comes at a cost, of course. If I can spread that out a little bit, I think that makes for a more effective experience. So that's gonna be one of my favorites. I also don't like the entire thing that amazingly, we haven't done it on this call yet, where it's like at least somebody once in every call has to say, I'm sorry, I was on mute. But we've somehow avoided that this time.
I was gonna play a
There you go,
joke,
Chad.
but then I was like, anyway, I appreciate all your insights. We have some great questions from the audience, so let's dive into those. And folks, as always, I'm gonna do my best to pronounce your name. So forgive me if I don't pronounce it the way that you prefer, so bear with me there. First, actually, two questions, sort of both from the same person, but they're both really about the same clause of ISO 13485, and I suddenly feel like why don't I know what this clause is? But I know there are folks on this call who do. So the question comes from Rama Krishna, and I'll ask them both, and I think they're similar, but Ramakrishna asks, for a product medical device software, what should be reviewed for manufacturing as per ISO 13485 2016 clause 7.5? And then actually, I think the second question is actually just a clarification. So SAMD, for product medical device software is clause 7.5 of ISO 13485 2016 not applicable. So who wants to George, go.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that. I mean, I think often software device manufacturers, yes, you're a manufacturer. If you look at the definition in 820 of what a manufacturer it is, it's very broad. They've often struggled with this, and particularly since they may not even have, you know, a system where they're pressing to DVD or to CD like they may have in the past. And so your manufacturing line may not be, you know, as if you were producing a hard device, but you are doing something from when you have completed your V&V of that to making that available to your customers. That is a set of processes that I would suggest are something to be considered of in manufacturing. So you might have to blur your eyes a little bit, but think about how do you bring things to production, and considering those clauses, and considering really what's good. More importantly, what's an important set of processes for you to assure that you're doing that in a high quality way.
Anyone want to add to George's explanation on software with respect to ISO 13485 clause 7.5? All right, we'll move on to the next question. This comes from Rona. Rona states, it's difficult to provide records without an explanation of content. Do you just provide records or only provide them in a setting where you can explain what they contain and show? Who wants to take that?
I'll take it. I can just say that I don't think we have the luxury of preamble in a virtual audit. That's one of the risks. So I suppose you could put the documents in the folder and then send a message to the auditor and say, hey, just so you know, folder A has data prior to this or that, or this is the date range or something like that. Another approach is to be super intentional in the naming conventions of the document so that you characterize or communicate what it is by the way you name it and organize the documents. I know not everybody has that time luxury, but that is a challenge. You put yourself a bit at risk without being able to explain. But when you're on the other side as the auditor, sometimes that's a good thing, right? You're not allowed to be biased by what the auditee is telling you that you're seeing. Instead, you just get to see for yourself what you're seeing. So again, I'm sure it depends on the auditor, but in general, I don't think we have the luxury of explanation in advance.
I mean, playing devil's advocate, shouldn't a record stand on its own without requiring additional explanation?
It should, but it doesn't, as you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
like
know.
an Excel spreadsheet, like what is this? Tell me what I'm looking at. I mean, how many times do you see that or hear that?
Yeah, what's the unique nature
point.
of the data? What's the unique nature of the data that you're sharing? Are there any special characteristics, to Colleen's point, a cover note, something to characterize it? It may, you know, yeah, the benefit is you just look at it for the pure data, et cetera. But the other side of it is you could be talking past each other if you're both not looking at the same information for the same purposes. So sometimes those cover notes of some sort, whether it be an email about the file you just transmitted or something, can be very useful and helpful and save a lot of pain in the long run.
Yeah, I would also suggest that if you have a record So yes, it should stand on its own. But if you have sets of records in some particular area that require a lot of backstory, then you may want to ask yourself why, and what can I do to bolster those records so that when I'm gone, or whoever can tell this story is gone, we can do the archaeology by looking at that as well.
I wish I had said that. That was smart.
Colleen, I want to be at an audit with
All
you.
right.
I mean,
It's a good time. It really is, and I'm being sincere. I learned so much
it's a
about
good
auditing, and
time.
it really. I mean, okay. Disclaimer: present company included. We love audits and inspections. Outside of this present company, some people may be like, "Are you guys crazy? Why do you love audits and inspections?" So that is my bias. I do enjoy these activities. Norbert, I'm going to throw this question your way. The question comes from Maxine. Max, we're going to go with Max. Sorry, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the rest. Max asks, should we directly share everything in our EQMS with the external auditor, or only the SOPs, and share the other documentation when asked to?
It was for me, John.
Yes, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we would provide that piece by piece, little by little. Yeah? So that's the way how you conduct an audit. Yeah? So any follow-ups on the initial document, you provide that one. We expect that's a standard preparation and standard execution of an audit.
Well, let's
Anyone?
dispel a myth right now. I was going to say, let's dispel a myth. I think sometimes being the auditee, we feel as though the auditor or the inspector, that they're just coming here to try to trip us up, and they're purposely trying to find stuff and point out things that mistakes that we made. I mean, that's not really what an auditor and inspector is trying to do, right?
Well, from the European perspective, of course, we want to make sure that it's compliance, but still, it's a spot check what happens during an audit. So, and yeah, typically you start at a certain point, and then you dig deeper into the rabbit hole, and you want to see if what is planned, what is documented in SOPs, work instructions is really executed, is really happening in the organization. So that's a typical way how you conduct an audit from a European perspective. So that's not the intention to find any non-conformities per se, but certainly check the compliance, have a proper audit trail on having covered all of the activities and tasks.
All right. So go ahead, George.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be, I mean, we've all been on, in addition to being auditors, we've been on the other side of the table. And I think all of us would have a tough time suggesting, okay, here's everything because of our personal experience. But I do think that's an aspirational goal that you should, and use that as an advantage, right? I mean, obviously, even if you did get, and there are organizations that are out there that have basically put forth their entire QMS, and you know they're participating in like the digital health pre-cert program, right? Everything's there for complete transparency. Use that as a competitive advantage if it makes sense, and be that inspection ready. Now that's a level of maturity and capability that takes a long time to get to, where you can just say, here it all is, right? And obviously I'm not talking about IP or anything like that, but
Right.
you have to be considerate of cybersecurity as well.
I mean, I think that is the utopia. I mean, and somebody, and maybe a couple of you have said it today, like we should always be ready for an audit or inspection. And if I truly believe in my practices, I should have nothing to hide. But you know, we also didn't just wake up yesterday and are new to this whole experience. We've all been through it one way or another in the past. All right, so Steve, this is probably a good question for you, and this comes from Glenda. Glenda states, I did not think FDA could legally issue a warning letter as a result of a remote review. My understanding was that they were required to reassign the review to an actual in-person inspection, issuing a 482 notice of inspection, 483 inspectional observations, etc. Is this what you were referring to, or are you saying they actually issued a warning letter during and as a result of a remote review? So hopefully
They
you
did,
followed along with me. That was a long one.
that's fine. They did actually issue, under their authority to collect records, while it's not an inspection, they have reviewed those documents. And again, this is just on pharma and bio. It does not affect medical devices. And it doesn't affect the RRA program for medical devices, where they will not issue warning letters. They will not issue 483s, et cetera. Even under the 704A4 authority for drugs and biologics, they don't issue a 483 either. However, based upon the review authority, they did issue at least one, I believe maybe two now, warning letters based upon the review of that information that was submitted under the authority of 704A4. And it is not considered an inspection. You are quite correct.
Steve, I have a question
Okay.
for you then on that. I mean, like, because I think we've seen warning letters that come out just without inspection based upon
Correct.
inappropriate claims, right? I
Correct.
mean, so yeah.
You can get warning letters for unapproved products that had nothing to do with an inspection. You can get failure to submit adverse event reports or MDRs. You can get it for failure to 510K. You can get it for a whole bunch of reasons not related to having an inspection, an on-site inspection.
Great clarification. All right, so this will be our last question today. And I'm going to kind of blend a couple of them together. The first part is from Ricky. Ricky's question is, what is your understanding that the FDA will transition from FDA 21 CFR Part 820 to ISO 13485? Blended with that, I'm going to add Mark's piece. And Mark says, listening to Norbert's and Steve's responses regarding FDA and EU authorities' position on certification requirements and approaches, does anyone on the panel have any indication that the two groups are talking with each other that would allow the industry to go forward in a more globally harmonized way? Colleen's shaking her head no. Go ahead, Steve.
Let me, just recently, Jeff Shuren presented at Xavier's MedCon conference 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, maybe it is. He was the first day of the conference. And that specific question came up because it's pretty well known FDA will be transitioning to ISO 13485. And there have been a number of reported false starts as to when that will happen and when that transition will take place. And that question came up again to Dr. Shuren, to Jeff, during that conference. And again, his response was, we have so many issues before us that are COVID related right now. Our people are so flooded. We have so many requests for EUAs. We have so many requests for so many other things right now that he didn't say it wasn't a priority, but he did say he can't say when that will take place, which indicated to me it's not in the immediate future.
It's not the top of the pile.
Exactly. But that being said, I mean, ISO 13485 and 21 CFR Part 820, with very few exceptions, are pretty well harmonized. And there's really not going to be, who's going to have the greatest transition, and that's FDA investigators. It's not going to be industry, because so many firms are in MedSAP programs and various other programs. They get inspected by Norbert through the EU. They get inspected. They're aligned. It's going to be, quite frankly, in my opinion, it's going to be tougher training FDA's investigators than it's going to be training industry.
Any reactions to that? Go ahead, Norbert.
I can add to this. Yeah, we do have a harmonized approach with the MDZAP program, and US FDA is part of the 5 MDZAP regions.
Correct.
So the door is open. Yeah, you could decide for MDZAP instead of Part 820. So it's just voluntary, and what
Exactly.
I experience, not too many use the voluntary route here. So
Well, I think more and more are using MedSap. I mean, that's a growing program, and there's certainly a lot of advantages to industry for that one-stop shopping concept, and being able to accommodate a lot of regulatory bodies with minimal interference.
I agree, primarily driven still from other markets or Canada or Brazil. That triggers MedSap certification, not to replace or substitute the Part 820. So to what we experience.
Eventually, I think as EU gets more experience with MDR, et cetera, they're observing the MedSap program, and at some point they'll be transitioning in as well.
Yeah, and as an auditing organization to suit, we combine so the 13485 MedSap and MDD and MDR combining into one audit activity.
Right.
And at the end, you have all the certifications or evidence complying to these requirements in one activity. So that's the way how we integrate things.
Right.
All right, so we're at a point where we're going to put a wrapper on this. Does anyone have any final thoughts, tips, pointers, suggestions, things that you thought we would cover that we didn't cover before we conclude our session today? Going once.
I give one more insight from that survey the team and they did, comparing the number of non-conformities for remote audits and on-site audits, and in most of the cases they have the equal number of non-conformities. So
that's interesting.
A few had a bit less findings, and only 1.3% had more non-conformities than in a remote setting than in an on-site audit. So just might help a bit to understand. Is there more scrutiny? What does it mean in terms of intensity of an audit?